I was listening this week to Craig Rochelle's podcast on leadership, and he said something that really touched me. He said, a cognitive bias is a systematic error in thinking when your brain wrongfully filters information through your personal experiences and preferences. In other words, it's when your thinking is a little bit messed up. You filter things. See, we don't see the world the way it is. We see the world the way we are. And he said 3 biases that we have. Confirmation bias. It's a tendency to search for and interpret information in a way that confirms your previous preconceptions. The status quo bias. It's when you prefer what's known over what's the unknown. And when the alternative options are objectively better. Anchoring bias, it's when you take too much weight on the first information you received about a subject. You know, in being in ministry, if you work with people, if you're a manager or a supervisor, and one of the employees comes in and let's say makes an accusation against another employee, and it sounds so right, it sounds so convincing, and if you jump on that and make a decision based on that information without having critical thinking, without doing some research, and without asking the opposite view, you can quickly jump to the conclusion and realize you just made a wrong decision. A lady came to our church when I was just a youth pastor. I think I was 17 years of age. It was the first older Caucasian, just kind of like the way it is, a white lady that came to our church. She was not Russian, all right? We were excited. I'm like, we're gonna keep this person in our church. And her first thing when she comes to church was this. A pastor who was a friend of mine, I went to this pastor's 5 a.m. morning prayers Monday almost through Friday, me and Pastor Ilya. And her first accusation is this pastor abuses people and he abused me. Now I'm 17, I go to this guy's prayer, seems fine to me, but I don't know him. So she keeps coming and literally she barely talks about anything about our church. Everything just bashing about the church. Now I show up to this guy's prayer meeting. I'm like 17 years of age. I'm learning to pray. He's teaching me how to fast. And I'm half of the time like, this guy's an abuser. I don't know what I do. I call police. I'm like, what do we do with this stuff? I mean, does he have a board and all of this stuff? She comes for 6 months. And I'm like confused in my head. 6 months later, she sends me an email. She says, I'm leaving the church and I'm going back to the same church. And I said, but you were abused. He said, oh, that's not really what happened. I said, you told me that every week for 6 months. She says, well, I misread the information. It wasn't like that. And I was like, you gotta be kidding me. I'm like, I almost sent her the verse from Revelation where liars will have the place in lake of fire. And I was like, you almost turned me against a minister that I personally knew. I went to his house, I knew him, over a lame accusation that you made, and now you went back to that ministry. And I've had a lot of that happen with believers, where I want to encourage us as our church to have wisdom and discernment, and not to be rash, impulsive, quick to speak, quick to anger, slow to listen, and slow to investigate. Denzel Washington said, if you don't read the news, you're uninformed. If you read the news, you're misinformed. Not everything that comes through your television is truth. And we lived through COVID, we know that to be the truth. Media's bias. This does not mean that we become skeptical. This just simply means we don't swallow everything as the truth without doing proper research, investigation, and we are people of the truth. We cannot be moved by what's hot and trendy. Not everything that's trendy is the truth. Not everything that's hot is holy. And not everything that's popular is right. And not every majority speaks for morality. A crowd shouted, crucified him, Jesus deserves to die, and they all were wrong. All of the communism and said Christians are stupid, uneducated, their God is dead. All of communism was wrong. And they're dead. And Christianity is still thriving. Critical thinking is an analytical process that involves asking questions, seeking to understand, addressing issues or actions. It's driven by humility, curiosity, and a unifying purpose. A critical spirit is a negative fault finding that tears down rather than builds up. It's marked by pride, indifference to people and context, and seeks to divide than to unite. Hungry Gen, we will not possess a critical spirit. We will possess a critical thinking. We don't bash other churches, the churches we disagree with. We don't attack other churches that preach Jesus, point to Jesus, and do things differently. And if you come from another church and you want to build a group at our church that bashes other people, I'm going to tell you one thing, you will find an enemy in me. Because I don't shoot our own brothers. We have an enemy, his name is Satan. It's not the pastor that you came from. And it's not the church that you came from, but they do things differently, yes. And you will see a lot of things even here that might be different. But if they preach Jesus, if they preach the Lord, if they point people to Jesus, if they preach holiness and righteousness, they are our friends, not our enemies. We forgot that Jesus promised that His followers will be falsely accused. In Matthew chapter 5, verse 11 and 12, I do have to remind us of this verse. It says, blessed are you when they revile and persecute you. But I want you to notice the third persecution. And say all kinds of evil against you. Did you see this word? Falsely. For my sake. Number 12, verse 12. Make sure you make statements and make videos to destroy all of their arguments on YouTube. Verse 12.